Okay, what's up? So I'm a bit late on this because I've been busy moving, but still wanted to make a video talking about Blizzard's response and this massive blue post talking about M plus rewards in Dragonflight. There's a lot. I don't want to say a lot, but there's actually a decent amount to unpack just with how this stuff went down in general, with what Blizzard is going to be doing with rewards come Dragonflight. Not just rewards, but what their philosophy for how they're handling dungeons in Dragonflight. And I actually felt like this blue post was very insightful. It comes off the back of, I would say, a lot of blue posts via Blizzard that that have began to like kind of articulate their thought process on how they want M plus to function and just the game to function in general. So I think that overall Blizzard's communication over the past couple months has been great. I'm excited to see what more they have. And this was something that I had talked about and that Blizzard mentioned at some point, what they're going to be doing with loot and amongst a bunch of other stuff. So first off, we have seasonal dungeon rotation. This is talking about, so basically how this goes down is you start the season with 8 dungeons. They're going to rotate them out. Next season, we're going to have 8 brand new dungeons. But we're only getting 4 Dragonflight dungeons at the beginning, and we're getting 4 Legacy dungeons. If you've been paying attention, that's how it's going to go down. And then season 2, there's going to be the other 4 Dragonflight dungeons, and then the 4 different Legacy dungeons, which we don't know which they're going to be. Okay, so basically, they believe that this will result in a better overall experience by providing primary Mythic Plus players with more of the sense of exploration and progression that each season that raiders get to enjoy with new raids. Much of the fun in M Plus comes from seeing yourself get better at playing these dungeons through experience, but opportunities to learn and improve become more scarce the longer a dungeon stays active in the pool. And so keeping the level of effort required to get the best rewards consistent season over season. Learning a new raid can be fun and challenging, but the relative ease of completing an M plus dungeon that everyone mastered last season can create heavy social pressure to spend time in M plus gearing up, even if it's not your preferred activity. And they want to create a space for returning players to jump into M plus, even if they did not play in the previous season. So imagine taking a break during season 1 and coming back in season 2, only to join an M plus group and feel like you're holding them back because everyone just knows a strategy and you've never had the chance to learn. With dungeons rotating every season, everyone gets to start on a relatively even playing field and figure out new strategies together. I felt like their reasoning for the seasonal dungeon rotation was fairly solid. In regards to learning new dungeons, you could actually see this 2 different ways. You could say providing primary M plus players with more of a sense of exploration and progression each season that raiders get to enjoy with new raids. However, there is a counterpoint of saying like, oh, you're forcing these players to have to relearn the dungeons every single season, and that can be pretty daunting, especially with 8 dungeons that have to be completely learned from ground zero. And there's new seasonal affix that's thrown in on top of that with a meta shakeup. However, it's kind of just the state of the game, right? If you ever participate in a raid, like you have to relearn how a raid works. You have to learn the bosses from zero. And so it kind of makes sense that I, personally, at least from my experiences playing the game, the most fun I have in M Plus is actually learning the dungeons at the beginning of the season and kind of figuring out the mechanics. And then whenever I come up with some like nice tech or everything kind of just like starts to click together in regards to how the dungeons feel, that for me is incredibly rewarding. So I think that their rationale for the seasonal dungeon rotation also makes sense. In addition to that, keeping the level of effort required to get the best rewards consistent season over season is something that should happen. We saw dungeon level creep pretty heavily in Shadowlands. Obviously, season 4 is the most crept season. There are people doing 34s, but even taking season 4 out of the equation, people the first season of Shadowlands were only able to do 26s and 27s. People the last season of like the Shadowlands dungeons were able to do 33s. Is that a problem? I would say yes, because it makes it more difficult for Blizzard to be able to properly incentivize players if some seasons doing a 20 is the same as doing a 15 in a different season. And so keeping the level of effort required to get the best rewards consistent season over season, this isn't just going to be impacted by the seasonal dungeon rotation, although the dungeon rotation definitely does play a factor into that. And then I think that this is actually super important. Creating space for returning players to jump into M+, even if they missed the previous seasons. We talked about this on the podcast recently. We were talking about how to jump into dungeons as like a tank player. And I think that that's a large amount of friction is like, learning how to, so for as a DPS, more often than not, I can kind of skirt by and put in minimal effort. And if I don't know what mechanics are going on in the dungeon, but the other players do, that's fine. For a tank or a healer, they don't get that luxury. And if they miss the last season and there's like really super meta dominant strategies or skips or anything like that that players are expected to do, but you didn't know because you didn't play the last season, that kind of sucks. Obviously, you're going to learn that, especially if you're playing a tank, probably. But I do think that creating a space for players to jump into Mythic Plus, even if they missed the previous season, I at least think that what Blizzard is saying here for the seasonal dungeon rotation is solid. Let's talk about seasonal affixes. So they've been a staple for M Plus for years now, but what purpose do they solve and why do they keep making them? Basically, what Blizzard is stating, their key role is to shake up gameplay. We're asking you to play the same dungeons for well over a year or like a full patch, and adding new twists help them keep feeling fresh. I would tend to agree. I think that seasonal affixes have been a hit. I think that some of the design of the seasonal affixes just have been a miss, but I think just in general, the concept of seasonal affixes is something that I'm okay with. It gives us an opportunity to add a thematic flavor and give each season identity. It's cool to have N'Zoth or Denathrius influenced with Mythic Plus dungeons at the same time they're featured in a raid. I think that that's good as well. Like, is it that big of a deal? Probably not for me. But at the same point, do I think it's like positive? Yeah. And then it's also a great place to experiment and try new ideas. We can keep things that work well for future seasons while safely leave behind things that didn't work as well. When was the last time we saw Gahoonies? They didn't work that well, and so they got removed. We saw Emissary of the Tides turned into Inspiring. Now, Inspiring's been retired, and so we've tested that twice, and it's probably not coming back if I had to guess. But they do have the option to be able to test stuff and try things, and they could potentially bring them back. But as great as seasonal affixes have been, they also have their limitations with their relatively high complexity and strong seasonal ties. They're mostly a lost history once the season is over. While they do have experimental value, they don't contribute as much long-term benefit as we'd like. That's really interesting to me. Oh, does this mean that seasonal affixes could get merged in the rotation at some point? A side effect of the dungeon rotation changing above is that it takes pressure off the seasonal affix being a big thing. I like that. And transforms your gameplay in a new season. This has given us more space to really think about what a seasonal affix might look like going forward. Should we try to make seasonals that can become regular affixes in future seasons? Should we stop doing them in favor of something else entirely? There are lots of interesting questions to consider as we move forward. I think that this makes sense. Okay, so look at it from Blizzard's perspective and what they're saying. This actually makes a lot of sense. So in Shadowlands, you needed very polarizing seasonal affixes to make the dungeons not bland, because on month 18 of the expansion, you've done that specific dungeon maybe 500 times if you're doing a lot of dungeons, right? Maybe 100 times even if you're not doing that many. That's still a lot. Now, the seasonal affix needs to change up something, because once you start season 3, you're like, oh man, we just got done with Tormented. This seasonal affix feels the exact same. This is the exact same dungeon. Does that suck? I mean, there was a major complaint in Shadowlands just that the dungeons felt too bland. And like that was largely attributed to the pool of 8 dungeons, just only there being 8 dungeons for such an extended period of time. And not changing anything regularly. And so I think it makes sense what Blizzard is stating here, but with the dungeons changing regularly, the seasonal affix doesn't have to be as polarizing. Instead, they can make something that's a little bit less complex, and then they can rotate it into the affix pool later on if they think it's good. On Beta Realms, you'll soon be seeing an experimental version of the seasonal affix Thundering. We're still iterating on it heavily, and it's likely the functionality will change. But it should give a sense of the level of complexity we'd like the seasonal affix to occupy in Dragonflight, since you'll already be learning a new subset of dungeons. The seasonal affix can be less complicated and focus more on being about thematic flavor. Oh my god, I can't speak. Let's see. I was doing dungeons earlier today. Let me see if I can get some of that for you guys, just to show you what it looks like. One moment. Okay, so here it is. It's coming up in a second. It's this. So basically what happens with Thundering is that there are a bunch of swirlies on the ground. You get targeted with this circle around you, and you get these balls. And then after, let's say 8 seconds, the balls expire, and they shoot prideful lines out. That's basically the complexity that Thundering entails. Is it a little bit more complicated than normal affixes? Yeah, Kinda. Is it that much more complicated than normal affixes? No, not really. It's not that much more complicated. There's no percent-based timers. There's no, I have to kill massive lieutenant mobs. It's just something that works on a global timer that the sky gets dark. There are these swirlies on the ground, and you get a debuff surrounding him. And so whenever we're chalking down like that, it's not that complicated. Another shift is that you'll likely notice the reduction in the amount of borrowed power provided by seasonal affixes. While feedback from beneficial affixes has been positive, and it's a space we definitely want to continue exploring, we hit a level of power in Shadowlands that felt extreme and contributed heavily to the short-circuiting effect described above. I would agree. The power is a bit too strong. Especially via Prideful and Shrouded. I would say that so Prideful, the downside's very steep, but the power gain was also unbelievably high. Shrouded, the downside's not that high. The power gain's unbelievable as well. And I think that, like, you know, the Kiss Curses have been nice. I've actually liked them. I hope that they changed Thundering in some capacity to have some positive element to it. But I wouldn't hold my breath. I think that it would be... So they say it's a space that we want to continue exploring while they're saying that they're already changing it. I would be interested to see if they could add something a little bit more positive to the Thundering. At least be a little bit less melee punishing, but we'll see. We'll be keeping a close eye on both how this feels in playtest and on player feedback, and may try other directions if it doesn't work out as well as we like. Basically, they're saying that this isn't done yet. For example, there's a world where we have beneficial effects closer to Shadowlands, but also make enemies more powerful to offset that extra power. The key takeaway here is that we want to continue to experiment with M+, and hope you'll appreciate seeing a bigger difference in your experience with each season of Dragonflight. What they're saying, everything that they've been saying here is really good for me. Like, these are green flags. These are all unbelievably positive things. I think that Blizzard is, with what they stated in these first two sections, is on one. Now, probably the most controversial part of this, and something that I saw a lot of people talking about, rewarding dedicated M+ players. Throughout Shadowlands, we've observed a trend where players who've mastered a set of M+ dungeons are seeing their sense of progression short-circuited in subsequent seasons. This is a complex problem that intersects with several of the topics above, but the bottom line is that something valuable is lost when the best gear you can get from M+ isn't necessarily something you earn by investing time and effort into getting really good at M+. AKA, what they're saying is, the best gear you get from M+ is high-rolling your vault, not getting really good at M+. To be extremely clear, this does not mean we want to make M+ less rewarding. It's a major pillar of the end game for World of Warcraft, and for players who focus on it should have access to competitive rewards. I agree. To be extremely clear, no, I already said that. What it does mean is that we want M+ to have more of a sense of progression as you push higher and higher keys, and we want that the gear that you get to feel like a reflection of that. To achieve this goal, we're making two big changes. First off, starting with Keystone level 11, we're increasing the rate at enemies gain health and damage by each subsequent key level from 8% to 10%. Obviously not a dramatic change at any given key level, but it should contribute to giving each step up more of a sense of progression. Secondly, we're adjusting the item level of gear rewards from both end of run chests and from the Great Vault, and scaling their item level growth up to Keystone 20. Let's talk about this in two parts. First off, I want to tackle the... It only makes sense that you're tackling the gear first, but we'll just tackle the percentage health gain because I already have this pulled up. So 8 to 10%, you know, not that big of a jump. It's going to end up being, I read it was going to be like 2.5 Keystone levels or so. At a 20 Keystone in Dragonflight, it will be about the equivalent to a 22.5 in Shadowlands. Now, Shadowlands had a lot of stuff tuned down, and so Dragonflight may have, like, just at its base, some more deadly mobs. But effectively, a 20 should be around relative to a 22.5, which in some seasons, 22.5 really hard. Season 1 of Shadowlands, 22.5, you know, 22.5 was tough. 24s were like where dungeons started to get hot really hard. Like a 22 is like, this is tough to pug range. A 20, I mean, but in 22 in season 4, you know, pretty easy. So it kind of just depends. But here's the chart. I'm going to link this down in the description. You can go look at it yourself. Basically, the dungeons are just going to be harder. And I mean, with the primary focus of they want you to have more of a sense of progression that you're pushing the dungeons. I mean, I think that's one of the situations where they don't want you to be able to jump into an LFG pug, zero voice, one shot it with people who aren't super familiar with the dungeon. I think that they felt like 15s or like whatever 10s, where you were able to consistently and constantly, even at the beginning of the season, jump into no voice 15s or whatever, no voice at the highest level keys that gave rewards and one shot them. That seems like a mistake. We're also introducing an additional Valor tier, and that will increase the maximum item level of Valor upgrades that players can unlock with higher M+ ratings. We can review the chart below for further details. Let's take a gander. Let me zoom out a little bit. So, first off, basically it goes all the way up to 20. And you might actually ask yourself, oh, what does this mean? What is a 405 equivalent to? What is a 421 equivalent to? So how the raid bosses are set up right now, the first 4 raid bosses are 415. They drop 415 pieces of gear on Mythic. The next 2 bosses of the raid drop 421 pieces. And so the final 2 bosses of the raid drop 424 pieces. So if you're doing 20s consistently, your weekly vault is going to have access to multiple 421 pieces. This is actually a big deal. So it's a big deal for raiders and it's a big deal for M+ players. Because you're able to effectively get... I mean, this is going to be the closest that M+ has ever been in regards to item level. Like, you're going to have a lot of M+ gear that's probably going to appear on BIS lists. Like, if you have to create like a full BIS list, there may be a lot of M+ gear that ends up on those lists. It's going to be difficult to get every single piece. Some classes don't have weapons at 421 or 424. You know? So getting that gear from M+ is going to be important. And for raiders, you're going to need to be able to do 20s. For M+ players, I don't see how this is a negative. So at minimum, you're getting 398s and 411s. And so you're able to still, like, so say you're still doing 15s or whatever. You're getting 398s and 411s. But at the same point, there's this sense of progression. It's going to be harder. It's going to be way more difficult, right? For you to, if you're somebody who just normally does 15s and now you're being asked to do 20s and there's an expectation of you doing 20s, you might not get there initially and it might suck. It might be hard, but you'll be able to get there eventually. It'll take some time. It'll take some pushing. You might have to find a group. You might not be able to pug it. It just kind of depends on what the state of the season is going to be. But I do think that what Blizzard is stating, at least, is a noble cause where they want you to have a more of a sense of progression. Because right now, unless you're actively pushing keys for score, there is not much of a sense of progression for M+, even early on. So some seasons, in season 1 of Shadowlands, I pushed for Realm First 15 with some guildies, and we got it. Like, we got it on Friday. 15s were achievable the first week. I mean, that's how it was. Were 20s achievable the first week? Absolutely not. Will 20s be achievable the first week of Dragonflight? Almost certainly not. Like, I cannot see after having tested these a little bit, I cannot see a world where any team ends up being able to do a 20 the first week. And so it's going to slow down gear gain by a lot. It's going to be tough for some players to make that push, but I do think that general sense of progression is something that is a good cause, and I think is healthier for M+ moving into the future. Let's talk about Valor upgrade requirements. If you get 2400, you're able to Valor upgrade your gear to 415. Now, they didn't say anything about how much Valor you're going to be earning or Valor caps or anything like that. But being able to upgrade your gear to 415, so I ran a BIS. I just took all of the highest item level gear that I could get from Raid for my Moonkin, and I was going to end up wearing 4 pieces of 415 gear from Mythic Raid. Now, I'm going to also be able to, if I'm 2400, be able to replace those pieces with, I would probably say, decently statted gear, probably better statted gear in some situations than the gear that is coming from those first 4 bosses of Mythic. That's actually crazy. And I don't know what 2400 is going to be equivalent to. And I don't know what 2K is going to be equivalent to. I don't know if they're changing the scaling on how the score works or whatever. It's not something that I've explored thoroughly. But the fact that you're able to upgrade gear all the way up to 415, basically the first tier of Mythic bosses, that's very good for M+ only players. Anyways, this is a better system. This is a better system. I do still think that there is a major issue in the game right now with end of run rewards and Great Vault rewards. So here's the thing. Here's the thing with end of dungeon rewards. The fact that they're completely spammable is a big issue for Blizzard. I think that this kind of locks Blizzard into not allowing you to be able to actually even get the highest level rewards because I honestly think that 421 is fine. Like whatever. They're actually bumping it up, and you're able to get effectively like really high level mythic gear. It's fine to not have you be able to get the item level off the last 2 bosses of mythic. It is what it is. I do still think that there is an issue of the Great Vault, where like you can't target any pieces of loot, and so you're just banking on high rolling out of like a massive dungeon pool. And then in addition to that, I think that like end of dungeon rewards, they're too good early. I mean, I talked about it in a YouTube video, but basically how it goes down is like, I'll draw it again for those who can't see the YouTube video. Basically how it goes down is like this. Let's just talk about like beginning of the season. So beginning of the season, this is how good an M+ reward is. And so around week 4, week 5 or something like that, you get like major drop-offs, and there's major diminishing returns from like end of dungeon rewards relative to like at the very beginning of the season. But M+ gearing at the very beginning of the season is way too good. Whereas for raid stays good. Actually, raid increases in how good the gear gets over time because you are progressing bosses, and the bosses are dropping higher item level gear. So then at some point the raid gear will plateau or so because you're done progressing, but like M+ end of dungeon gear is constantly getting worse. And then in addition to that, you're always trying to hope for a Great Vault. But overall, I think this is a great change. I think that overall, is it perfect for M+ only players? And is this reward system perfect for them? No. Is it perfect for raiders who sit there and they look at this and they're like, damn, now I have to dedicate a lot more time to doing M+, because before I could kind of coast doing 15s, and now I have to really try to do 20s. Is it going to be better for them? Is it a perfect system for them? No. Is it a better system on the whole for M+ being healthier for the community? In my opinion, I think so. And I think it will be good. Shorter affix rotation. Something, the last experimental change we'd like to talk about today is placing a couple of our regular affixes on hiatus and reducing the number of weeks on the affix rotation. Dragonflight Season 1 and Inspiring and Necrotic affix will be taking a break. A long-deserved vacation, indeed. And the affix rotation will be reduced from 12 weeks to 10 weeks. Our thought process is, Inspiring is a good affix for changing up your gameplay when you have thorough knowledge of a dungeon, but it can feel especially punishing while you're still learning. This didn't feel like a good fit with the increased emphasis on learning dungeons each season going forward. Actually, this is really true. This shit was so hard. I think that Inspiring, there was something wrong with, I think Inspiring locking you out of being able to kick mobs was brutal. Now, the CC immunity, I thought the CC immunity was okay, but the inability to be able to interrupt mobs was tough. And Blizzard, to their credit, put Inspiring on a lot of the mobs that you wanted to interrupt anyways. And so very infrequently did you have a situation where there were multiple casters that weren't like non-interruptible, but there was a decent number of times, like I can just think about Halls of Valor, my tank is just getting bolted and the mobs are kick immune and the mobs are stun immune, and you're like, this is so difficult. Like, it's so difficult to play, and it's so jarring compared to other affixes. I think that I agree with Blizzard's sentiment here. This makes sense. I don't hate that they removed it. In addition to that, Inspiring in a dungeon like Court of Stars and Halls of Valor, just and in Shadow Moon Burial Grounds, just in my mind, that emanates like a visceral reaction where I'm like, oh god, dude, I have to deal with Inspiring imps or Inspiring thunder callers and things like that. I'm like, oh god. Necrotic was originally intended to be an affix that challenges tanks, but it's becoming increasingly apparent that routing responsibilities already placed a tremendous pressure on tank players in M+. So we're trying giving this affix a vacation. This is actually maybe the most candid thing I've ever heard. They're like, dude, tanks, they already got it hard enough. They don't need a stupid affix that forces them to have to kite packs. Like, they already have enough pressure on them, whatever. This is actually maybe one of the most candid things I've ever heard them say. And with a shorter affix season overall, we're hoping that we can reduce the perceived disparity in difficulty between weeks now to allow players to more regularly feel like they can make meaningful progress towards increasing their M+ rating. I think this is a perceived issue, generally. I think for most players, you're able to increase your score every single week. Now, is it going to be harder some weeks? Yeah. But I think that in general, this has normally been a perceived issue. Maybe I'm lying here, but I think in Shadowlands, especially the last couple of seasons of Shadowlands, the affix rotation has been decent, especially since the introduction of M+ rating. The disparity between like top to bottom for just between affixes, it hasn't felt that bad, at least to me. But overall, yeah, I think that Blizzard's reasoning of dropping this from 12 to 10 weeks and allowing you to have, instead of 12 good weeks, hopefully it's 10 great weeks. That would be nice. Anyways, I think that this is all I really have to say about this. I hope you guys enjoyed this type of video where I'm going over Blizzard's reasoning and feedback and kind of giving some commentary to it. I'm interested in hearing you guys' thoughts and opinions, and I will be back with some more videos later. I gotta upload a lot of different stuff. I got like a Moonkin nerfs that I have to upload probably tomorrow. I have some bosses or raid testing that I have to get uploaded as well. This moving thing kind of caught me off guard, but I'll be back with more videos this week, and I'll see you guys later.